Top 5 Weirdest True Crime Stories Ever. On a desolate beach, a man is found dead with a coded message in his pocket that no one can crack. In a quiet suburban home, a killer slaughters an entire family and then lives in their house for days, feeding the animals and eating their food. These aren't scenes from a movie. They're just 2 of 5 real-life cases so bizarre, they still defy all explanation. Today, we're exploring a handful of true stories that are so strange, they feel like they should be fiction. These are the cases that keep detectives up at night, the ones where every clue just leads to more questions, and where logic completely breaks down. I've sifted through hundreds of cases to bring you the stories that truly stand apart, the ones that linger in the shadows of our understanding. They remind us that the truth is often much weirder than we could ever imagine. If you're fascinated by the unexplained and the unsettling corners of history, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. Case number 1, the Somerton Man. Our journey begins on the sunny coast of South Australia. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, the body of a well-dressed man was discovered on Somerton Beach. People had seen him the night before, slumped against a seawall, but just figured he was drunk or sleeping. He was in a perfectly tailored suit and tie, his shoes were shined, and his hair was neatly combed. There were no signs of a struggle, no injuries. He looked like he could have been a businessman just resting by the sea. But he was dead. This was strange enough, but as police started digging, the case went from an unexplained death to one of the most baffling mysteries of the 20th century. The first problem? No one knew who he was. He had no wallet, no ID, and even more unsettling, all the labels on his clothes had been carefully snipped off. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, meticulous effort to erase his entire identity. Police checked missing persons reports and shared his photo, but nobody came forward. His fingerprints didn't match any records on file. The autopsy was a dead end, too. The pathologist guessed it could have been a sophisticated, untraceable poison, but it was just a theory. Officially, the cause of death was inconclusive. Months passed. As investigators went back over the man's few possessions, they finally caught a break. A pathologist found a tiny, hidden pocket sewn into the man's trousers. Rolled up inside was a tiny scrap of paper printed with 2 words, Tamam Shud. Library officials identified the phrase as Persian for "it is ended" or "it is finished." The words came from the last page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of poems. Since the poetry is all about living life to the fullest, some thought this was a clue to a poetic suicide. So a nationwide search began for the exact book the scrap was torn from. The search eventually led them to a local man who, right after the body was found, had discovered a rare copy of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back of his unlocked car. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but when he saw the police appeal, he handed it over. Sure enough, the last page was torn out, and the scrap from the dead man's pocket was a perfect match. But the book held even more secrets. Faintly written in pencil on the back cover was a local phone number and a bizarre string of capital letters that looked like a code. Experts were called in, but no one could break it. Was it a complex spy cipher? A list of horse racing bets? Or just random scribbles? To this day, the code is still a mystery. The phone number led investigators to a nurse named Jessica Jo Thompson, who lived just a short walk from the beach. When she was shown a plaster cast of the man's face, she was reportedly horrified, but denied knowing him. Her denial has always seemed suspicious. Witnesses said she looked like she was about to faint and was clearly hiding something. It turned out she once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat that she'd given to a man named Alfred Boxall. For a minute, police thought Boxall was their man, until they found him alive, well, and with his copy of the book completely intact. Theories exploded. Was the Somerton Man a Cold War spy, killed with a secret poison? Was he a jilted lover who had come to see the nurse, only to be rejected? For over 70 years, the man lay in a grave marked, "Here lies the unknown man." But the story wasn't over. In recent years, Professor Derek Abbott and American genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick got access to hairs found in the original plaster death mask. From those fragile strands, they painstakingly built a DNA profile. In 2022, they announced a breakthrough. After building a massive family tree of over 4,000 people, they identified the Somerton man as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. Webb had separated from his wife, had a passion for poetry, and liked to bet on horses, which could explain the book and the code. While the genealogical world widely accepts this identity, South Australian police have yet to make it legally official, pinning their own analysis of the man's exhumed remains. But even with a name, the biggest questions remain. Why did he leave his life behind? And how did he die on that beach? Giving the ghost a name hasn't solved the puzzle. It's only made the story more haunting. Case number 2, the Hinterkaifeck incident. Next, we leave sunny Australia for the dark, isolated forests of Bavaria, Germany. Here, in 1922, a remote farmstead called Hinterkaifeck became the scene of one of the most chilling mass murders in history. The crime wasn't just brutal, it was profoundly weird, surrounded by bizarre events that started long before the bodies were ever found. Hinterkaifeck was home to the Gruber family, who were known in the local village for being reclusive and troubled. The family included the elderly couple Andreas and Casilia Gruber, their widowed daughter, Victoria, and her 2 young children, Casilia and Joseph. There was also a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who tragically arrived on the very day she would be murdered. The family wasn't popular. Andreas was a known tyrant, and dark rumors of incest between him and his daughter Victoria had followed them for years, for which both had been convicted and served jail time. In the weeks before the attack, things at the farm got strange. Andreas told neighbors he'd found footprints in the snow leading from the woods to the farm, but none leading away. It was as if someone walked out of the forest and just stayed. Soon after, the family started hearing footsteps and whispers from the attic. Andreas searched, but found nothing. Then, a set of house keys vanished. A few days later, a newspaper from Munich appeared on the property, one they had never bought. The previous maid had actually quit months earlier, claiming the house was haunted. The feeling of dread at Hinterkaifeck was suffocating. Someone was watching them, maybe even living in the shadows of their own home. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, that tension finally snapped. The killer, who had likely been hiding in the attic, made their move. Investigators believe the perpetrator lured 4 of the family members, Andreas, Casilia, Victoria, and her daughter Casilia, out to the barn one by one. There, in the dark, they were all bludgeoned to death with a mattock, a heavy farm tool. The attack was savage. An autopsy later revealed that young Casilia had survived for several hours, tearing her own hair out in terror as she lay next to her family's bodies. The killer then went back into the house and murdered the last 2 victims, 2-year-old Joseph in his cot and the new maid, Maria, in her bed. It was her very first and last day on the job. But the weirdest part isn't the murders themselves. It's what happened next. The killer didn't run. They stayed. For 3 days, the murderer lived on the farm with 6 dead bodies. Neighbors saw smoke coming from the chimney. The cows and chickens had been fed. Someone had been eating food in the kitchen. It was as if the killer was playing house, calmly taking over the life of the family they had just slaughtered. It wasn't until April 4th that neighbors got worried. A search party went to the farm, where they found the horrific scene. The investigation was a mess from the start, with the crime scene being trampled by curious villagers. Over 100 suspects were questioned through the years, but no one was ever charged. The main theory centered on a neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who was rumored to be the father of little Joseph. His behavior was suspicious, but no hard evidence ever linked him to the crime. Another theory pointed to Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, who was supposedly killed in World War I. Some wondered if he'd survived, came home, and committed the murders in a jealous rage. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders are unsolved. We don't know who the killer was, why they did it, or what they were thinking during those 3 days they lived on the farm. The case is a chilling reminder that sometimes the monster isn't at the door, it's already been living in the attic. Case number 3. The Villisca Axe Incident. From the fields of Germany, we head to the American heartland, to a small Iowa town that became the setting for a crime so brutal it still defies explanation over a century later. This is the story of the Villisca Axe murders, where an entire family and their young guests were slaughtered in their beds, leaving behind a crime scene filled with bizarre, almost ritualistic clues. The date was June 10th, 1912. Villisca was a peaceful, tight-knit town where nothing bad ever happened. The Moore family, Josiah, Sarah, and their 4 kids, were well-liked and respected. On the evening of June 9th, they attended a church program. Afterwards, their children's friends, Ina and Lena Stillinger, asked if they could spend the night. The Moores said yes, and the 8 of them walked home together, completely unaware of the horror that was waiting for them. The next morning, a neighbor noticed the Moore house was eerily quiet. She called Josiah's brother, Ross, who let himself in. What he found was a scene of unimaginable carnage. All 8 people, the 2 parents, their 4 children, and the 2 young guests, had been bludgeoned to death with an axe as they slept. The murder weapon was found in the room where the Stillinger girls were, still bloody. Investigators believe only one victim, Lena Stillinger, may have woken up during the attack. The rest never knew what hit them. The sheer brutality was shocking, but it was the weird state of the crime scene that made this case an enduring mystery. First, the killer had covered every victim's face with a cloth or blanket after they were dead. Second, every mirror and piece of glass in the house had been draped with fabric. This has led to all kinds of theories. Was the killer superstitious, or did they just not want to see their own reflection? And it got stranger. In the kitchen, a bowl of bloody water sat on a table, as if the killer had washed their hands before leaving. Next to it was a plate of uneaten food. And maybe weirdest of all, a 2-pound slab of raw bacon was found on the floor of a downstairs bedroom. What on earth could that mean? The investigation was a disaster. Hundreds of townspeople walked through the house out of morbid curiosity, contaminating everything. The murder weapon was Josiah Moore's own axe, suggesting the killer hadn't brought one. Police also found spent cigarettes in the attic, leading to the chilling theory that the killer had waited there patiently for everyone to fall asleep. Several suspects emerged, but nothing ever stuck. One was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling minister who had been in town that night. Years later, he confessed, claiming God told him to slay utterly. But his story was rambling, and he later recanted. He was acquitted after 2 trials. Another suspect was Frank F. Jones, a powerful state senator and Josiah's former boss and business rival. The theory was that Jones hired a hitman, but no evidence ever connected him to the crime. A third theory suggested a transient serial killer was responsible, as similar axe murders had happened across the Midwest, but no definitive link could ever be made. Over a century later, the Villisca axe murders remain unsolved. The strange clues, the covered mirrors, the bacon, only deepen the mystery. The house still stands in Villisca, a grim monument to the 8 lives that were stolen that night and a question that will probably never be answered. Case number 4, the Sodder children disappearance. Our 4th case is one of the most heartbreaking mysteries in American history. It starts not with a body, but with an absence, a hole left by a fire that has fueled nearly 80 years of questions, conspiracy theories, and one family's undying hope. This is the story of the Sodder children, 5 siblings who vanished on Christmas Eve, 1945. Did they die in the fire, or were they stolen into the night? The Sodder family lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George Sodder, an Italian immigrant, and his wife Jenny had 10 children. George was very outspoken, especially with his criticism of Mussolini's fascist government, which had caused some friction in the local community. On Christmas Eve, 1945, 5 of the older children asked to stay up late to play with new toys. Their parents agreed and went to bed. Around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. A woman on the other end asked for a name Jenny didn't recognize. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and went back to sleep. Just an hour later, Jenny woke up to the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children managed to escape, but the 5 kids who had stayed up late were trapped upstairs. Panic set in. Everything that could go wrong did. George ran to get his ladder to reach the second-floor windows, but the ladder, which was always in the same spot, was gone. He then tried to drive one of his coal trucks up to the house to climb on top of it, but neither of his trucks would start, even though they'd been working perfectly the day before. The phone line was dead. By the time the fire department finally arrived at 8 a.m., the house was nothing but a pile of ash. The 5 children were presumed dead. But as the smoke cleared, the real mystery began. Firefighters searched the ruins, but they found no bones, no teeth, no remains of any kind. The official explanation was that the fire was so hot it had completely cremated the bodies, and the cause was listed as faulty wiring. George and Jenny Sauter refused to believe it. Jenny started her own experiments, burning animal bones to see if they would disappear. No matter how hot the fire, some bone fragments always remained. A crematorium employee confirmed her suspicions. It would take a 2,000-degree fire burning for hours to destroy human bones, way hotter and longer than their house fire. The family started to believe the fire was a cover for a kidnapping. The missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the dead phone line. It all started to look like sabotage. George remembered a stranger had recently stopped by, pointed at their fuse boxes, and warned they would cause a fire someday. Another man had threatened George that his house would go up in smoke and his children destroyed over his anti-Mussolini comments. Over the years, alleged sightings of the children poured in. A woman at a tourist stop claimed to have seen them in a car as the house was burning. Another at a hotel said she served them breakfast the next morning. The most tantalizing clue came in 1968. Jenny received an envelope containing a photo of a young man who looked just like her son Louis would have. On the back was a cryptic note. They hired a private investigator to look into it, but he took their money and vanished. The Sauters never rebuilt their home. Instead, they turned the site into a memorial garden and put up a large billboard with the children's faces, offering a reward for information. George and Jenny died without ever knowing what happened to their children. The case remains open, a haunting mix of tragedy, conspiracy, and a family's love that never gave up hope. Case number 5, the Black Dahlia Incident. Our final case takes us to post-war Los Angeles, a city of dreams that became a nightmare for one young woman. This is arguably the most famous unsolved murder in American history, a crime so gruesome it became a dark American legend. This is the murder of Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia. On January 15, 1947, a woman walking with her daughter in a vacant lot made a grisly discovery. At first glance, she thought it was a discarded store mannequin. As she got closer, she realized it was the naked body of a woman. The scene was horrific. The body had been cut in half at the waist with surgical precision and completely drained of blood, making the skin a ghostly white. The body was clean and posed. But the most awful detail was the victim's face. The killer had carved a grotesque smile from ear to ear, known as a Glasgow smile. The brutality was both personal and performative, designed to shock. The victim was quickly identified as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress. The press, in a frenzy to cover the story, nicknamed her the Black Dahlia, likely a nod to the recent movie The Blue Dahlia. The name stuck, and Elizabeth Short the person was lost behind the legend. The investigation was massive, but it quickly turned into a media circus. The The surgical nature of the crime led many to believe the killer had medical training. Since no blood was found at the scene, she was clearly killed somewhere else, and her body was moved and deliberately placed in that lot. The killer seemed to enjoy the attention. About a week after the discovery, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner got a call from someone claiming to be the murderer, who taunted police and promised to mail some of Elizabeth's things. Sure enough, a package arrived containing her birth certificate, photos, and an address book. The whole package had been wiped clean with gasoline to destroy fingerprints. The case became a mess of false leads and fake confessions. Over 60 people came forward to confess to the murder, but all were dismissed as publicity hounds or mentally unstable. The list of potential suspects is long, but one of the most compelling came from an unexpected source, the son of a prominent doctor. Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD detective, claims his own father, Dr. George Hodel, was the Black Dahlia killer. The evidence is circumstantial but chilling. His father had surgical training. He owned a large home where the crime could have been committed. Steve even found a photo album with a picture of a woman he believes was Elizabeth Short. A handwriting expert also found similarities between his father's writing and letters sent by the killer. Despite this, Dr. Hodel was never charged, and the LAPD has never officially closed the case based on Steve's findings. The murder of the Black Dahlia has become more than just a cold case. It's dark American folklore. It represents the sinister underbelly of the Hollywood dream. The artistic cruelty of the crime, combined with the fact that it remains completely unsolved, ensures the mystery of who killed Elizabeth Short will continue to haunt us. From a man with no name on a lonely beach to a Hollywood hopeful whose death became a legend, these 5 cases push the limits of what we understand about crime. They're more than just unsolved files. They're ghost stories for the modern age, playing on our fear of the unknown. They show us that for every mystery that gets solved, there are others where the truth stays hidden in the shadows, where the biggest question, why, is met with a silence that's louder than any answer could ever be. What do you think happened in these cases? Let me know your theories in the comments below.